Not here for that, you're in the wrong place.
Okay, the agenda is split into a couple of sections. We have this open house session, which we wanted to give people time in the beginning, but we're kind of running late and scrambling to set up, yeah, so our timing is a little off. But we had some information available for you, and what we'll do is, after we're done, we'll stay around and we'll be available to talk further about some of these things if this is why you came out and you're interested in that information. One is with regards to the Bottomfish Reporting Requirements and how you record that information with regards to effort. And Reggie is here. He has information. He has some documents for you if you are interested in that. We're also going to touch base on this topic a little bit at the end of the presentation, so that may answer some of your questions. The other thing we have available is Walter brought information related to the federal non-commercial fishing permit and reporting requirements. So he has some specific information. If you want to go and talk story about that, he has that available. Yellowfin Tuna, ahi, I have some handouts, paperwork, and you're welcome to take whatever you have there. We also have a presentation on that, so after you see that, maybe you'll have other questions, and we have some resources up here. And then the other document that I have up here, and I'll be happy to talk to anybody who's interested about this, is the Council's Community Fish Aggregation Device. So we have a community FAD program that we have a voluntary reporting tied to that. So I'm more than happy to talk to people who's interested in the FAD program. So, otherwise, that second part 2 of the agenda is where we have some formal presentations. And is there anything else that I missed in the beginning part? Because are there any questions regarding the agenda tonight that I can answer at this point? No? Okay, looks like we're... So the first topic that we wanted to engage you guys on tonight is this Yellowfin Tuna management, and it really focuses on the issue of the minimum size limit. Right now, the legal minimum size for sale of ahi is 3 pounds. And so over the years, we've heard concerns and suggestions about possibly changing that. And there has been some initiatives prior to actually take a look and change that, but it hasn't been changed yet. And as part of a state-federal kind of cooperative effort, what we did was we produced a video. And I have the video here. We showed the video for the first time in October at the Fishers Forum down at Pier 38 last October. I have a shortened version. The original cut is 20-something minutes. I got an 11-minute version that kind of hits all of the main key parts. So why don't I key that up, and then after that we'll start discussion on the minimum size.
From livestock. Yellowfin is a very important pelagic fish species here in Hawaii.
Yellowfin tuna outside of Kona is probably the premier fish that most people pursue, especially during the summertime when we have the larger classes of yellowfin tuna.
Yellowfin has always been important to not just the canneries that we used to have here, but it's very important to the recreational fishermen and our subsistence fishery as well.
People used to have this mentality in the world that with tuna, well, why should I conserve this tuna because tomorrow it's going to cross the ocean? But if you believe and know that your fish don't leave you, well, that's a whole different concept. We're full-time commercial fishermen. We make 100% of our livelihood from fishing, whether it be pelagic fishing or bottom fishing. I fish pretty much exclusively for Mama's Fish House on Maui. We do have 3 other wholesalers on the island, which takes a large chunk of the yellowfin and big eye that comes from our console fats that we have. When it's on, it's on. And when it's off, it's off. It's like a light switch, you know. If one day you be there, it'll pay. fighting. The next day you go, you won't catch anything. You know, it's that. It's It's just a water temperature thing or a current thing, or you know, just the food might have left and they're done. They're not there, and then you wait a day or two, and then they'll come back. You know, it's because they're migrating everywhere. They're following the food.
I was conducting research for the Pelagic Fisheries Research Program. And up here in Hawaii, we had tuna, but I was just curious, where do our tuna come from? We assume that they probably come from the equator, and some are born locally, and we have a good influx of fish coming in, etc. But that's all assumptions. These animals are really amazing. They're so fast growing, and they mature very, very quickly. Mature yellowfin tuna, the females will put out between like 3 and 8 million eggs per night, night after night after night, repeatedly for weeks at a time. And they'll be doing that after they're only about 2.5 years old.
In Hawaii, it's kind of an interesting situation because every summer we get these runs, and those are spawning aggregations of, you know, the big yellowfin. And you see all of the guys going out there and catching them. And those fish spawn, drop their eggs, and you know, the eggs are caught in the local currents and drift around for a while.
So they're fast growing, they reproduce a lot. We have a good spawning season in them here. But one of the questions that we always ask in tuna science is, how is our population of tuna that we have here connected to the broader Pacific, the Eastern Pacific, the equatorial regions? That is, how much can we depend on the population to be repopulated from that single population, or how independent is it? And none of that was really known at that time. Our next big project I got involved in was with Dr. Kim Holland, the Hawaii Tuna Tagging Project. We tagged 8,000 yellowfin tuna, and then you just let the experiment run and see where they get caught. What was intriguing was that out of all those thousands of yellowfin tuna, most of them tagged within the main Hawaiian islands, basically from Hawaii to the Big Island and neighboring seamount to the southwest. Of all those thousands of yellowfin tuna, throughout the whole span of the project and throughout their lifespan, they were only caught in Hawaiian waters.
So the histology of the fish, through studying the otolith, there's some chemical markers in there that says this fish was born in these waters, and when we catch them and we give those otoliths to the science center, and they look and says, oh yeah, this is a local fish.
Studies we've done with that large tagging project, we're able to develop size-specific natural mortality estimates for yellowfin tuna. And surprisingly, the natural mortality levels dropped very low to their minimum at about 10 pounds. So after 10 pounds or so, what that tells you is that that fish has a very good chance of surviving in the wild. The tunas mature over kind of a size range, so there's not just this point where they all start spawning. For yellowfin tuna in Hawaii, the size ranges from about 35 to 100 pounds. We use a length-based figure, so generally most of the fish mature at about 112 centimeters, about 44 inches, when we estimate that half the population is spawning. And that occurs somewhere between 2 and 2.5 years of age, so it's quite young.
About 10 years ago, there was an initiative in the legislature to take a look at placing some minimum sizes on both yellowfin tuna and aku or skipjack tuna. So I believe what happened in sort of a compromise, which usually occurs in the legislative process, yellowfin tuna was assigned a 3-pound minimum, and aku was not assigned any minimum right now. So for home consumption, it's important to know you can consume an aku of any size, you can consume a yellowfin tuna of any size. You just can't sell a yellowfin tuna that is less than 3 pounds.
There were no studies done at that time. There was no scientific evidence. There was no justification or real reason to regulate at 3 pounds. It has nothing to do with the size of maturity or the size of anything really. it was a holdover of someone's desire to initially regulate skipjack. There's been some discussion about old laws, if they're not appropriate, get rid of them, revise them. Been a long-standing debate within the state what to do with this law.
What David's work has shown is that with a relatively modest increase in minimum size would put the fish at a period in its life history where its natural mortality rate is at its lowest. And so if fish landed above that minimum size, one would expect more of the specimens to reach maturity. If we say had a larger minimum size, which I believe some people would be disadvantaged from being able to land small yellowfin. How big is that community? Even if it's small, what aspects of that community make it vulnerable? Maybe it's like 10% of the population, but it might also be that it's 90% of all the poor people or below a certain income level. So, you know, you have to be able to describe those impacts.
Similarly, the most recent assessments for yellowfin indicate that it is not being overfished and is not in an overfished state, but it's probably pretty close to the level of population size that can produce the maximum sustainable yield. And so there is concern about it not being overfished in the future. And there are close attention being paid to it and its stock assessment to try and make sure that we stay on the good side of the thresholds of overfishing and overfished.
The 3-pound size, 3, 4, 5 pounders are a lot easier to sell than the 5, 6, 7, 8 pounders. Just because it's a more usable size for any family. It will affect how much we can sell, but you know, I think we have to look at the resource. We have to make sure that we have enough for future generations, and you know, I think we can try a larger minimum size.
The smaller tuna, if allowed to go to a larger size, when they get to about that 12 to 16 pound range, if they're allowed to survive in greater numbers, grow much quicker at that point. So the benefit to the fishermen by leaving those smaller tunas out there rather than catching them or selling them is that you will have theoretically a larger number of fish after a certain period of time in the larger class range, which is the more desirable class range for sale for poke markets and sushi markets. If we can convince fishermen that it's in their best interest to not catch large numbers of small yellowfin tuna in Hawaii, which the science shows are born and sort of stay around the waters of Hawaii. So it's a stock that we really should manage because we're responsible for our own and our children's futures when it comes to yellowfin tuna. If we observe a little bit more restraint, the fishery will improve in the long run.
We should protect our resources for our people. We should make sure that they are sustainable, but we want to look ahead, you know, preparing for the future.
Okay, I thought they did a pretty good job on that video, trying to capture all the different dynamics of the science and some of the issues behind that. As I mentioned earlier, the issue is not a new issue. It's been discussed prior, and you know, we've been working on this particular issue for a while too. And so we've actually taken the issue out to the public, and we heard from people in prior meetings, and wanted to just share a couple of things with you guys. Informal, totally unscientific, but just kind of interesting. There's 2 events where we put up this so you know how they kind of showed the different size ahis They drop them down, the size, yeah, and how old they are, and what % are spawning. So we made this really big banner, and we hung that underneath there. We had these bins underneath, and everybody that came in and registered, we gave them a pebble, and we told them, well, go look at the display, and get the information about the issue, and then what's your opinion? Throw your pebble into one of the bins that you thought would, an appropriate size limit. If you thought it needed to be changed, you could throw it in a 3-pound bin too. Yeah, it would mean no change. And so the black bars is the Hawaii Fishing and Seafood Festival of 2013. Yeah, where 20,000 people or so come through the festival. They had quite a bit of people come in and participate in that, and the black bars, and for those of you who can't see, it's 30 to 39 pounds. It was the bin that received the most votes in terms of how big the minimum size should be. And if you look at the festival and the participants, it's pretty generic. Yeah, it's families, it's guys who maybe go fishing, but probably a lot of guys who don't go fishing, but probably eat fish, and they come from all different walks of life. Okay? And so the other event that we did this at was the Fisherman's Forum. So when we hold our council meetings, we usually hold an evening event. And at that particular forum, we did the same exercise. We put up the banner with all the bins. We gave everybody a chance to vote. And so they put their pebbles in the bin. And that's the white bars, the hollow bars. And for that, the bin is it's hidden underneath there. It's 10 to 15 pounds. It's that second. Yeah. So the first bar is the 3-pound bar. So you can see kind of the difference. And I think you got to look and see what the demographics of people who come to our Fishers Forums are. And typically our Fishers Forums, they get maybe 100 to 200 people who come down. And they're typically more of the active fishermen who are actively interested in some of the issues that the council is talking about, participating in. Sample size is a lot smaller. But anyway, for what it's worth, you can get a whole bunch of different opinions depending on who you ask. And I think part of the exercise for these rounds of meetings is to get more input and more opinions on what people think should be done. And if something is suggested to be done, what are those impacts that we need to be thinking about? Both positive and negative impacts. And so, as a starting point, what we did was we took that out and we said, well, the minimum size for the commercial sale of ahi is 3 pounds. So you can always leave it alone and not do anything. The other suggestion was to create a 10-pound minimum size, which is the size of the fish where the natural mortality kind of drops. And once the fish reach that age, there's a better chance for them to get to the spawning age. And then the 20-pound minimum size limit even gives them a better chance to get to the spawning age. And so our pelagics guys put some information together regarding those 3 ideas, leaving it the same, a 10-pound and a 20-pound, and what are some of the things that, just to trigger, think about. And so if you leave it the same, from the regulatory standpoint, we wouldn't do anything. There's no changes. You would continue to be able to supply those fish, 3 pounds and over to the market. Yeah, people who buy those fish will continue to be able to buy those fish. Some of the cons, or the con that's listed here is at 3 pounds, the fish obviously are not going to get less of a chance to reach the sexual maturity age. If you do a 10-pound minimum size, what are some of the things you need to think about? As I just mentioned, the fish gets to that age where the mortality drops off, so they have a better chance to survive to sexual maturity. On the cons, they have some issues on here, so they have some interesting numbers. The first one is, forget about the first one, that's increased administrative burden, whatever. If you change the rule, you got to go through the process of changing the rule. The government guy's got to do the work, right? Okay, that's not a problem. But the fish, less than 10%, 10 pounds now, yeah? Fish, the ahi, less than 10 pounds now, says comprise about 23% of all the troll and handline yellowfin tuna sold today. That's almost a quarter of the fish that are caught and sold. So that's quite a bit of fish you're talking about. And then 8% of the big eye tuna. Yeah. And so something to think about anyway. So the 23% could represent a significant impact to the fishermen and the consumers. So, and if you go up to 20 pounds, then the yellowfin tuna, that represents 32% of what is caught and sold. So now you're talking about a third of the fish or so. And then with big eye tuna, it jumps to 52%. Yeah. So there's some impacts that we need to be thinking about, because that's a lot of fish that's coming to the market from those fisheries, the troll and handline fishery. Let's see. So some of the thoughts. We have a couple of things in the handout, the survey that Altinda has provided. On the second page, actually, it starts with the high commercial size limit. There's some questions tied to the issue, and this doesn't limit your comments by no means. Yeah, this is just some talking points, and for those of you who help us and complete the survey, it's not going to be used as a vote or anything like that, and all the votes where wherever it comes. That's not the idea. It's just to get a pulse and feel for what people think, as we go through, because this is a scoping meeting, the initial engagement. We want to see and take the issue out to the community, get some feedback. Okay, and so if you fill this out, yeah, and turn it in, give it to us at the end. We'll give you a ticket, and then with the ticket, we have a few prizes over here, small kind of stuff. We'll give away. One of them is not bad. One is a handheld GPS unit. Yeah, and so I got the other. The other is a multi-tool thingy that everybody can use those things. And then the other one has a pocket knife and a flashlight. So in any case, those are some of the things that we want to engage you with now in discussion. So, okay, do you have anything else you want to add to this discussion, background, the state side? Because the regulation today actually is a state law. It's a state rule. Yeah, there's the federal side. It's not.
A little bit. Yeah. Thanks, Mark. The current state law says that it's ahi minimum size 3 pounds, and we've heard from the fishermen saying that the 3 pounds was a matter of convenience when it was first created in the legislature. So it was a compromise that the legislature came up with. And so we've been hearing from the fishermen that that 3 pound limit is kind of small. And so what we've been hearing also is that it should be bigger. And so part of this discussion here would be to find out from you what you think. Is it okay? Should it be bigger? Just to give you some background, this is the third meeting of 7 meetings that we're going to have statewide. So the first meeting was on Kauai on Tuesday night. The last night was on Molokai. So tonight is the third meeting. So what we've been seeing from the other 2 meetings so far is that generally there's support for increasing the minimum size. Where that discussion is right now is kind of around 10 to 15 pounds, something like that. But don't let that determine for you what size you think it should be. But just to let you know, that's kind of what we're hearing. So, and as we go through the rest of the meetings throughout the state, we'll add to those numbers in terms of what people think might be a better size limit than 3 pounds. So in your survey, we asked, well, what do you think about raising it? Should it be raised? Should it be kept the same? And part of that discussion about the commercial size limit, there was a question about, well, why is it only a commercial regulation And should there be something for the non-commercial ahi fishermen as well? So we asked some questions related to the non-commercial side of the ahi regulations. And so there's a question about should there be a size limit for non-commercial ahi fishermen? Should there be a bag limit for that as well? And so on Kauai, what they felt was that the minimum bag size should apply to everybody, whether you're commercial or not. So they felt that we're talking about a fish that's very small, not for sale, so people take it home. And so you don't want people taking home like 1,000 pounds of undersized or small ahi for sale either. Even if they say they're gonna just eat it or give it away, you know that some of them are probably selling it off market as well. So they felt that maybe it would be a good thing to have a non-commercial bag limit of some kind. So that's on the questionnaire as well. So should the state consider creating those kind of regulations as well? Okay, so does anybody have any questions about the ahi regulations now, and whether you think that there should be non-commercial regulation? Opening it up for discussion at this point, I guess, okay? Yes.
I see in this form, everything is by weight.
Yes.
But I don't know how many fishermen actually carry a scale on their boat. And it would be some easier if you go by measurement, which is a lot of the other species of fish by weight.
Right.
Which is something more finite and easier to enforce.
Actually, when we create the regulation, it will likely be a length regulation rather than a weight regulation. For exact reasons that you mentioned, that to weigh something, you gotta have a scale, and the scale gotta be certified, and every time you use it, it has to be calibrated. So it's a little harder to enforce a weight limit. So it will be converted to a length limit. And the enforcement officer just has to measure. So a lot of people have rulers on their rulers so they can estimate the size better than weight. So it will be converted to that. And so just to let you know offhand, and so at 10 pounds, fish and ahi will be somewhere around 24 inches, about 2 feet long. The current regulation, 3 pounds, that's equal to about a 16-inch fish. Okay, so this is for your information. Yes, sir.
All these regulations you set up, bag limit, size limit, who enforces it?
The enforcement is done through the Division of Conservation and Resources Enforcement.
Yeah, but who will come out and enforce it? Or
Well,
you have to call it, or what?
You know, obviously, there isn't going to be an officer on every corner, on every boat.
There's no enforcement.
So what we're trying to do first is educate the fishermen why we're doing this, why we think it should be 10 pounds or 3 pounds or whatever that weight is going to be, so that we can get voluntary compliance to the extent possible. Right? But for those that are not willing to comply with the regulation, then you're going to need enforcement. There's a number of ways that we're trying to improve enforcement capacity. The budget is such that the enforcement did get some money last session to not hire more officers, but what was keeping them back was they had the positions and the money for the positions, but they didn't have money for training and guns and uniform and all the operating expenses. That got cut. So this past session, the legislature did restore some of that funding. And so because some of that funding got restored, they're able to fill the vacancies, more vacancies now. So there will be more officers in the field. Okay, so that's one. Two is, what we're trying to do is implement in the division, or in the department, a different penalty schedule. It's called the Civil Resource Violation System. And so that replaces the criminal court system that we've been using in the past. And so if you get a citation, instead of going to criminal court, you would go through the department's civil resource violations. So for those of you who are commercial fishermen, turning in monthly catch reports, you've maybe experienced some of that where if you are delinquent in your reports, you'll be getting a notice, and then if you don't comply, then you can get fined. And so what that's created now is incentive for fishermen to report on time. So we used to be getting about 50% compliance, and now we're getting over 95% compliance. So it's been very helpful to us, and there hasn't been a need for more enforcement officers in order to get that compliance. And so that's the kind of thing we're looking at to help us with compliance, not just having more officers in the field, but having a way to get more information to fishermen, having a way to get a little bit more, let's say, compliance with the regulations to a fine system. But the fine system, what we try to do first is we notify the fishermen. So you are delinquent, and then we give you time to comply. And there's no fine if you comply within a certain amount of time. Right? So we're not trying to get money from fishermen. What we're trying to get is compliance. It's only for those who take the next step and say, I've been notified and I still don't want to comply. Then you gotta impose a fine. So then there's graduated penalties for people who are chronic offenders.
It's just like picking on the fishermen. You don't comply, you get a fine. The markets go direct with the fishermen. They bring in, ahi, the size like on a belly. And you look at them, it's, you get the yellowfin, very good. Aku, they bring in aku, they just barely got stripes. It's selling that. And who's there to enforce?
So if the minimum size is raised to, let's say, 10 pounds, right, then that's something enforcement officers can check in the markets. They do periodic market sweeps, but what we want to do instead of doing market sweeps is we want to go in the markets, we want to educate the markets so that they don't buy the fish to begin with. Right? So what we're hearing from the neighbor islands especially is the markets, the major markets already have what they call an unofficial minimum size that they would buy. So if it's under 10 pounds, they don't buy it already. So the established brick and mortar markets are creating their own minimum sizes. What is still selling those markets is the roadside vendors, it's the guys who are catching and selling it themselves, right? So they're not in the marketplace, so to speak, but they're more in the communities. So those guys are going to be a little bit harder to track, but what we're working on also is a license system for dealers. And so as a dealer, before you can sell a fish, you have to be licensed, and then with that license comes the education outreach that says this is what the regulation is. If you don't comply, you will be subject to the same kind of penalties that commercial fishermen are subject to. Right? So we're working on different aspects of the fishing industry, from the fishermen to the markets, to the wholesalers, all the way till you get to the consumer. And so we're working through that process now to make sure that everybody along the line of that trade in fish are aware of what the regulations are, they know what is being compliant, and there's a mechanism to get compliance. So we are trying to address those problems in ways that do not necessarily require more enforcement officers. because we know that that's, and as much as we would like more officers, likely we're not going to get too much more in the near future. That answers your question. Maybe a little bit. Anybody else have a question?
Another question. How many people filled out the surveys on both the items you went to already?
I haven't counted them yet.
Give me a rough figure. A dozen, 2 dozen.
Well, at the Kauai meeting, maybe about 40 people.
No, both.
So Kauai and Molokai,
About 40. Filled out the survey.
Any other questions?
Okay, so the boat care officers in the future, who's gonna consult with them, educate them to determine the difference between big one and little workshop?
That's me.
So, he's wanting to let them know too, as far as the clarification on what the division will do to educate the enforcement officers to determine the difference between big one and Yellowfin.
In any regulation that we create, any new regulation, we go and we do training with officers on the different islands. We do training, I do training for new officers as well as training for the new officers. They all go through, the new officers all go through aquatics, they go to forestry, they go to boating, they go through all the regulations. Obviously, there's so many regulations, it's hard for them as just new recruits to know all of them. But what we do is we give them contact information. If you have a question, call me. I can answer your question. So there is a standard protocol for training officers. And it happens when we for existing regulations and for new regulations. Any other questions? So anybody have any questions on the minimum size and the non-commercial limits? You know how to fill out the form? Well, just a note, the men's bathroom is out this side, it's on the corner, so you go out the door, it's on this side. The women's bathroom, go out that side door, and it's on the corner on that side. If the light is not on, turn the lights on, and then you gotta unhook the door to close the door.
Okay, then, so what we'll do is we'll switch gears then for no more comments on the minimum size. Let's talk, switch over to the main Hawaiian Islands Deep 7 bottomfish fishery and some of the management issues that we're addressing there. I'm going to address item number 2, which is the market delay, and then Alton is going to address the 2 items with regards to the non-commercial bag limit and then also the BRFAs, yeah. And so what I'll do is, if it's okay with everybody, I'll address the market delay first, and then Alton can jump in after me and address the other 2 items together. So, with regards to the market delay, I just wanted to go over refresh everybody about the management regime for the main Hawaiian Island bottomfish fishery. So, at this point right now, we're managing the fishery under a fleet-wide quota. We call it an annual catch limit. It's set every year. The fishing year starts on September 1st and it ends in August, the end of August. There's a commercial permit and trip reporting requirement that's tied to this fishery. So if you have a CML and fish in this fishery, you're supposed to turn in your reports on a per trip basis. There's also a dealer reporting system where the dealers are required to report the fish that they purchase and sold. And so there's a non-commercial federal permit and trip reporting requirement, and that's what I kind of mentioned up here, that Walter can address. If you have questions and whatnot, we have the log form and examples up here. And then on both the federal and state side, we have a non-commercial bag limit for the deep setting species of 5 per person per trip per day. Okay, so that's kind of the ball of wax for that. Here's a snapshot of the management regime over the last 8 years, 7-8 years or so, when we transitioned the fishery into a quota-based management system. In 2007, 2008, we put in the first quota. It was called a TAC at that time, total allowable catch. And so it was fleet-wide quota, the fishery opened, and then we just accumulated the catch and the fishery closed when you hit the quota. Since then, you can see every year, yeah, from 2007, 2008, it's that split year because it starts in September, right? And you can see it come all the way down to the bottom, 2014, 2015. The next column is the quota that was established for that fishery for the year. And then the next column is the management regime that we had called and put in place. And if you look in 2011, 2012, which is about halfway down, we have a thing called the ACT/ACL. What Congress required all of us to do across the country was to manage all of our fisheries on a quota-based system. And a quota-based system, they call it the annual catch limit. It has some other requirements tied to it. If you hit the limit, you got to do some other things. And so since then, we've been managing it on that new system of annual catch limit. The next column you're looking at is the date of when the fishery closed, when it hit the quota. Yeah? And so you can see in the first 4 years, the fishery closed. Prior to August 31st is when the end of the year starts, right? I mean, ends, when the end of the fishing year ends. And then the last 3 years, the fishery did not close, it didn't quota. And then the second to the last column here are the total landings for those years, where it ended up. And when we get close to the quota, yeah, there is a projection period because it takes time to process the closure. Usually it took us about a month ahead of time. So we need to project out where we think it's going to be. So it's never exact, but you can see the variance there, whether it went over or under the quota where it ended up. And the reds are the quotas where the fishery did not reach out. And then in this current year right now, it got cut off there. I have a number 260 plus. It's actually something like, the quota is not set. We don't have a quota yet. We're supposed to have a quota, but we don't. And it can be anywhere from 266 or so to 346. And so we're working in the same system of the ACL. Yeah, we went through the process of the Fishery Council recommending what the quota would be. The Council recommended a quota of 346. But there's a new assessment that came out this year, 2014, that calls into question how that 246 is. And so that recommendation of 246 went to the National Fisheries Service, who implements the quota. And they have yet to determine what the quota is going to be. They're arguing that it's not going to be 346. It's going to be something less than that. And so we don't know what it'll finally shaken out to be. But at this point, we're how many months in? September, October, November. We're in December. 4 months into the fishery now. Going into it, yeah, we don't have the quota. And then here's some numbers that I got from the state last week. On the bottom, so we have 90,000 plus fish, bottomfish, landed as of last week Friday. So this is kind of a snapshot of the fishery and how it's performed under the quota-based system over the last 8 years or so. So the first issue that I want to talk about is this market delay. And it's tied back to here. It's tied back to, you see the first 4 years when the fishery was closing? Yeah. It created a problem because the way that the rules are structured it's when the fishery closes, it's illegal to possess this deep seven bottomfish. And so we're thinking the whole time about the fishery, fishermen fishing, catching bottomfish, and then you gotta catch fish, fishery closes, and you're not supposed, after the closure, you're not supposed to catch any more bottomfish, right? But what happens is the fishery closes on the day that it's supposed to close. But then what do the fishermen do? The commercial fishermen are going to sell it to somebody. So whoever they sell it to, the market, if it's after the closure date, they're in possession and they're in violation of the rule. And so that kind of created a bunch of confusion within the community. And as the years went on, and we had these closures that were occurring, some of the markets, what they did was they began rejecting the purchase of bottomfish prior to the closure. So say the fishery closes today, or it's going to, say the fishery's going to close on Sunday this week. Today they're saying, you know what guys, we're not going to buy any more bottomfish. Even though you just went out fishing and you came in, you had a big load, you're trying to meet the deadline to get in. Yeah, but some of the markets are saying, no, we're not buying anymore. Because they're going to get stuck otherwise with it after the closure. And so some of the markets were rejecting buying fish a week out, days out. And so one of the suggestions at the time was for there to be established an official grace period. So the fishery could fish to its closure date, and then the markets could clear the fish after the closure date. And so with regards to this action, our discussions at the time when we were talking to the markets and the fishermen and whatnot, given the shelf life of the range of deep seven bottomfish, which will vary, bottomfish hold pretty well in ice. But if you're looking at holding the bottomfish for 7 days on ice, then what's a reasonable time period for a market to hold a bottomfish before they actually sell it, like somebody goes and eats it? Yeah? And so one of the suggestions that seemed to be popular was a 5-day grace period for the markets to sell and clear their bottomfish after the fishery closes. Yeah. There's also a 3-day grace period. We've also heard 7 days. Yeah. But the idea is, to be able to sell, because all these fish are fresh fish. Yeah. So you want to be able to sell wholesome fish and give people ample time to clear what they do to them. So these are just suggestions and that we've heard before. So if you have any other suggestions, now's the time for us to hear those suggestions. This is my last slide here. Benefits to the fishing community, and I think I've already kind of explained this. The benefit to the fishermen is you can fish to the closure date. The benefit to the seafood community is they're not illegal if they buy fish from fishermen who fish to that date. Yeah. And then when we do these rules, we got to look at all these other related or associated impacts. But with this rule, it's not going to affect non-targeted stocks or particular species or anything like that. So, is there any comments, suggestions, or?
Yeah, Mark. With regard to like restaurants, how would they be affected?
They would be affected by the same.
The market date.
Well, if it was 5 days.
Yeah.
Yeah, because whoever's in possession. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So whether it's sold directly to a restaurant or it's sold to a dealer and then a restaurant, you know what I mean? It's all those people will be subject to that.
Okay.
Yeah. Because of the way the possession is maintained. Guys said, Billy had a good point. Hey Billy, what's your good point?
So we were talking about the market delay. And for a fisherman, say like if you go on a long trip, from the day that they close it, you can still possess the fish. There's a delay.
So the fisherman can, and then the other twist, yeah, which we're gonna have to sort out too is, it's the fisherman can be the dealer, right? You know what I mean? The fisherman can be the dealer because he can sell it to the consumer directly too. You know what I mean? So that's why you're talking about, how does this work? Yeah. So we talked to the enforcement guys, I talked to the DOCA guys, and I talked to the Coast Guard, and I talked to NIMS OLE. And they say that this kind of management regime is not uncommon in other places. Yeah? But there are those issues, yeah, about how do you ensure that, you know, the guy's a fisherman, he's a dealer, or whatever. Yeah. But what ends up happening is it's illegal. But the idea is after a certain date, it's illegal to be on the water where they're continuing to fish for bottom fish after the closure date. Yeah. So for enforcement, it creates a problem where they actually got to go on the water now and go look. Yeah. Because everything on shore now is really they cannot tell when it came in. Yeah. And it's just being cleared now. Yeah. So it just creates an additional burden of the guys having to now go during that short 5-day period, if that's what it is, to get on the water, and then that's where the illegal activity would be, right? Fishing after the closure. Guys, you guys have any comments over here? Yeah. Longer than 5 days? What do you think it should be? 10 days. Why?
The fishermen, the fish buyer,
yeah.
You know, regret buying the fish because they don't have time to box and
You think it's the fish will hold for 10 days? Yeah? No problem. Okay. Okay. No problem. Go ahead.
I have a question. What happens if my birthday's in July, so I'm gonna freeze my fish that I catch now and take it to the restaurant in July on my birthday? Am I gonna be
technically you're illegal?
Yeah.
Yeah, you are.
That's not fair.
You are. And that's what No. At the time the rule went into effect, the guy who called that one out and was grumbling about that was Kurt. Because the bugger, he catch fish in his freezer all the time. Yeah. He says, all the fish in my freezer are illegal, which is technically true. But the question is, who's going to go chase you to your freezer? But if you take it to a commercial establishment,
that's right, Chinese restaurant or whatever, black beans, right?
But then the other part of it too is, where do you get them?
They won't take it.
How, you know what I mean? Because there is bottom fish available year round, even if there's a closure, because there's the import, yeah? The paperwork that goes along with imports. But it doesn't necessarily go down to the consumer. Good question. 10 days. That's one the suggestion here. I don't know. You guys think 10 days is... You guys hold fish for 10 days?
10 days.
You do. You hold them for 10 days, bottom fish. Any other guys, suggestions, comments? Yeah? Good input. No? I think we exhausted the comments on this one. I'll turn it over to Austin then.
Okay, so I mean, okay, so I'm going to do the state management plan for bottomfish now. So I'm going to do that easy stuff first. So the easy part is the non-commercial bottomfish provision. And what we're looking at for these is the state's non-commercial bottomfish bag limit is currently 507 species. So if you're non-commercial fishermen, you have a bag limit of 5 per person per day. So the first question is, should we keep it at 5 or should we change it? And it can go down or it can go up depending on what you folks think. Okay, so what drove this question was a number of non-commercial fishermen came to us and they said, you know, at 5 fish per person, the expense that they incur to go out on the boat far from shore, so it takes them time, effort, money to be able to fish for those fish. And that expense isn't recovered if they only can catch 5 fish. So they asked, can we increase that just to make it worthwhile for them to go out and fish? And so we said, well, we can ask the question. And so that's why that question is here. Should it be raised or should it be kept safe? There were a number of different opinions provided to us. Some said that it should be raised, and others said no, it shouldn't be raised. And so there's a number of different views on this. So if it's going to be raised to 10, then what happens is there are a number of non-commercial fishermen who got the commercial license just so that they would not be subject to the 5-fish limit. Even though they don't sell their fish, they got the commercial license anyway, just in case, so that they can catch more than 5. Okay, so they're getting around it directly anyway for them. But because they have a commercial license, they have to report what they catch, so that data goes into the court. So if we now raise this minimum size to, let's say, 10 or 15 fish, what happens then is those people who got the commercial license now will no longer get the commercial license, because then they won't have to incur the cost of the license and the reporting burden. So they're going to switch over to non-commercial. But by doing that, we're going to lose that data on how much fish they're catching. So not only do they get to catch more, but less of it is going to be reported to us. So what we're looking at, in addition to creating this maybe increase in the non-commercial bag limit, is we want to now talk about a reporting of that non-commercial catch. Okay, so tied with that is, right now there is no requirement for non-commercial reporting on the state side. There is on the federal side, but not on the state side. So if you're going to raise it, the question that goes along with that is, should that reporting change? Should it be the same, meaning that there's no reporting required? We don't even ask people to report. We don't even provide for a means for them to report even if they want to. And then the other option now is, should we make it voluntary? Okay, so if you make it voluntary, there's no incentive to turn in a report, but there's no penalty for not turning in a report. And so we're going to be providing people the opportunity to report if they want to. So we're going to either create a form that you can print out, or it will be available on a website. So there's a cost involved in providing that form to the fishermen through a website, but we're not going to recover that cost. So it costs us to provide this option for the voluntary reporting. And then the third option is, should we make it mandatory? But before we can make non-commercial reporting mandatory, we would have to create non-commercial bottomfish license to go along with that. So the registration would now change to a license, and then one of the requirements of the license is you have to do a mandatory report. So that's the process that we would have to go through to create that requirement. Okay, so what we've been hearing so far is that fishermen, commercial fishermen are saying, well, if I have to report, I'm going to hope that the non-commercial guys report as well. What's good for me should be good for them. And it makes somewhat sense, where that data that will go into determining of the quota, we'll have more data to feed into that model, and so it will give us a better estimate of what that level should be. So the question posed to you is, should there be a mandatory reporting for non-commercial? Should there be a voluntary, or should it be kept the way it is where we don't even ask? Okay, so does anybody have any thoughts on those two things? Raising the minimum size, raising the minimum bag, and the reporting requirements?
Maximum bag.
Maximum bag. Sorry, maximum bag. Okay, so let's take the maximum bag first. Does anybody have any comments, questions on raising of the non-commercial bag limit for changing the non-commercial value. Does anybody think it should be less? I didn't think so. Just asking the question. Okay. Does anybody think it should be more? Does anybody think it should stay the same?
Stay the same. I got a question.
Yes, sir.
At one point, we're doing some budgeting discussions. We're talking about, usually the boat person who, there's one person who reports all the catch, bottom fishing.
Yeah.
And it's usually the person who owns the boat that usually does it. Their commercial license.
Yeah.
There was talks about making like the boat have so much licenses per boat. Instead of so if somebody comes and visits me, a friend who doesn't normally fish with me, but yet let's say we go out and fish, then we don't get stuck with the 5 limit, 5 per person in correct. What's the status of that? Is that ever going to change, or is that gonna stay the same how it is now?
What you're referring to is a situation where you have a vessel, you are a commercial fisherman, commercial license, but your uncle or your brother-in-law, somebody comes from the mainland, he's only going to be there one day. And so you don't want to get commercial license for that person. So first thing is, what we're saying is, it's only triggered if you're going to sell the fish. Okay, so as the captain of the boat, you make that decision first. Right? Are you going to sell the fish? Assuming that the answer is yes, you're going to sell 1 or 2 fish and cover expenses, things like that. Okay, so then that would normally trigger that person coming from the mainland would have to be licensed. There's a $50 fee attached to that. There's a reporting requirement associated with that. So what we're looking at is what we're calling a vessel license from now. Okay, so what the vessel license will do, as the owner or operator of the vessel, that vessel that he's fishing off of would be licensed. So it would be licensed as a commercial vessel. Now that doesn't mean that everybody on the boat is selling. What that means is that boat is registered as a commercial vessel. You can sell the catch if you want to. You can have any number of people coming in and off the boat during the course of the year. But because the vessel is licensed, it doesn't matter. You don't need to have individual licenses. And so a person's going in and out are not subject to the license requirements. So that's the vessel, not the person. So what I think we're looking at is how does that work with the existing individual license when you have an individual license and a vessel license, and what should that look like in terms of the vessel license? So obviously what we want to do is, as a commercial vessel, there's some fees attached to that. Okay, so if we do this thing where the person coming on and off the boat is no longer individually licensed, we're losing some income from that. Right? So potentially, so what we're looking at is a system where that boat would be maybe registered based on the length of the vessel. Okay, so the bigger the vessel, the higher the cost, let's say. Yeah, but because the idea is the bigger the vessel, the more people you can fit on the boat. Okay, so one way is based on the size of the vessel, there'll be graduated fee structure. We haven't figured that out yet. It's still in discussion yet. The other option would be the vessel would have call it a crew rating, where depending on you as the boat operator, if you feel that you want to have a crew of 3, then you would register your vessel for 3 crew plus yourself, and then you can have anybody coming on and off as long as that total number doesn't exceed the crew rating. So, but doing it that way is not based on the length of the vessel. So you can have a 60-foot yacht, but you're only going to have 3 guys on the boat at any one time. And so then you would make out better if you go to the crew route rather than the length route. Yeah, but all of these things still have to be discussed yet. Yes, sir.
I have an alternative. As you saw from Mark's presentation, for the 2014-15 bottomfish season, that ACL or ABC might be reduced. So why not, if we're reducing the commercial catch by a percentage, then if the number is 5 for the non-commercial guy today, that 5 is already calculated in the total catch. That estimated, the ACL that is estimated, the biomass that is available to be caught. That's how the stock assessment is developed. So if you take a 25% reduction on the commercial side, then that 5 should be also reduced by 25%, or whatever that number is. Then there's equity in both sides, yeah, of the fishery, the non-commercial and the commercial. Now, if you increase the catch for the non-commercial size to 10, the stock assessment has to be revised, because now you're taking out more fish from the universe, right?
Well, let me clarify.
Okay.
Did you finish with your point?
Oh yeah, the point is it should be triggered similarly to the commercial side. Commercial goes down 10%, but non-commercial should go down by 10%. If commercial goes up by 10%, non-commercial goes up by 10%. Then the playing field is level, yeah? Everybody is feeling the pain if it goes down. Everybody is getting the benefit if it goes up, but the same percentage.
I had a conversation with Chris Boggs, who's in the video. He does the stock assessment, he manages the stock assessment for the science center. He told me that in the models, they assign the non-commercial catch 0. So what that means is they do not account for that non-commercial catch. Because there's no data to determine what that non-commercial
I think you need to go verify that, because...
So what he's using though is this term called unreported.
Correct.
So the unreported
include the 5 fish.
It's an estimate of the commercial fishermen who are not reporting or underreporting.
Right. And
it does not include, it does not include the non-commercial fishing catch.
That skews the whole thing.
I need to go verify that. Yeah, but
that's what you told me.
logically speaking, if you're reducing the commercial guys' catch by 10%, you should reduce the non-commercial guys' catch by 10%. Fair is fair.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And that is an alternative that I'd like to suggest.
Okay.
If it goes up, hey, he can go up 15% or whatever the commercial guy does. Yeah? The commercial guy is paying to catch the same fish the non-commercial guy is getting for free.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
To reduce it, if it's reduced, it should reduce for everybody.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Uncle is correct in one part, but there is a NOAA fee for non-fishing if you go outside state water.
Yes.
And right now, presently, I think it's $34.
Walter, what is the cost currently of the non-commercial federal bottomfish testing?
The current cost of the non-commercial federal permit is $34.
Jeff,
How many of those are there?
How many of them are you issued?
This year. This year, well, just reached 4.
Just 4. Just 4.
All the non-commercial guys are illegal but beyond state law.
I don't know.
It's gonna get hard.
So there is, there is that aspect. It costs the guy to apply illegal $34 to this fish. I mean, in federal waters.
There's a dichotomy there, because they say on one hand, when you talk bertha, that you're in state waters. And you're talking fishing deep 7 and the federal guys, the NOAA guys, and the state guys, all of a sudden federal waters are federal waters. So we gotta clarify that.
Well, according to the state law, we do not recognize the 3-mile limit
That's what I'm saying.
as the limit to state jurisdiction.
That's what I'm saying, so there's a dichotomy.
So we consider the berthas a state instrument in state waters for the purposes of the management of the bottom.
Why do you have to issue a new license to non-commercial to get the reporting?
That's a good question. Okay, so currently, a little off topic, but okay, so currently you have to register with the state to participate in the bottomfish fishery. Okay. Now the registration is different from a permit in that to register you do not have to qualify to register. All you have to do is apply and you can get it. If there's a permit, then you have to pay a fee, you have to be bound by a certain number of conditions and terms that are attached to that permit. Okay, so on one side, the registration, you don't qualify, there's no conditions required. On the permit side, you have to qualify, there's fees, there's all kind of requirements that go along with that. Okay, so the difference being, so why did we choose the registration versus the permit? Okay, so currently the department cannot require a license or permit unless the legislature authorizes us to do so. So we do not currently have the authorization from the legislature to require a non-commercial permit or license. So that's why we don't require one. But because the registration authority says we can regulate the fishery, but we cannot require licenses and permits. Okay, so what we do is we register people to be in the fishery, but there's no requirements other than to register.
Then is there a problem with saying, along with the registration, you have to report?
Yes, there is. That's a requirement that would be attached to a condition of a permit. On the registration, there's no authority to require that on the registration. It has to be a permit or a license.
Can that be changed by administrative rule?
No.
Statutory?
Yes.
Can that be changed by administrative rule? Statutory.
Yeah, so the registration is not individually. You register the vessel.
Same difference.
Well, there is a difference. You register the vessel.
In order to fish bottomfish, you have to register your vessel. So that's a requirement.
The convenient thing is you cannot swim and catch bottomfish. You have to use a vessel. So we attached it to the vessel rather than to the person.
Maybe you guys don't swim. Now it's right. But all I'm saying is you guys don't, that's a big hookup in the management picture. Because you don't know what the non-commercial catch is.
Yes.
Okay. It's a hookup in the model that they set the commercial catch on.
Yes.
So, in order to...
What Science Center says that, how do we deal with that non-commercial hookup? Require reporting. That's what they've already done. So what Science Center wants, what do you want? That's the question.
I get my glasses.
I think the non-commercial guys should report.
Okay.
Because that's going to be a major factor in the management tools you guys have to tell us commercial guys you can only catch 3,000 pounds.
How come my battery's dead?
Us guys, we get commercial license.
Yeah, and the guy's talking that, pump off for us, pay gas and travel out to fish 5 feet. Sometimes we stay gas, we buy ice, we buy baby oil, we don't fish too.
And you pay for the license.
And we pay for
and you do the reporting, but you still don't catch by
And you see, when we put the whole package in the beginning, we were trying to make it easy for the state. That's why we have the federal reporting. Yeah, what they were trying to do, they went in and just tried to make if you're fishing for bottom fish within state water, go get the federal permit. Because for the feds, that's what we do, right? It's like, if you're fishing within federal water, the EEZ, go get the state CML. You know what I mean? Our regs just point to their regs. And so for the non-commercial, they would just have their regs point to the federal regs. And then the system would be established. But they would have that element of the package got shut down. They never go through.
So what I'm hearing is non-commercial reporting should be mandatory. Okay.
Otherwise, there's no data. How do you level the field, like what Controller was saying? Where does the numbers come from when you have data? How much impact is the non-commercial putting on the fishery? Everything is based on commercial reporting.
That's what science center is saying. You need to require Okay, any other comments, questions on? Yes, sir.
So, on a non-commercial factor, if I go out and catch 5 on hot right now, I go out and catch 5 knocked out here, asking what's wrong. So, like, could it be different? Could it be a bag limit for aqua and a different bag limit for the rest of the New Zealand?
We used to do that. When the federal government changed it to all 7, that's when we changed it to all 7. Before, I don't know if you remember, the state, the non-commercial 5 limit was only on Malanga and Ava. So there was no limit on the number of haka that you could catch. But the federal government changed their scheme, and so we had to follow suit to that. Can it be changed back? We'll have to follow the federal regulation on that. So yes, it can be changed.
So on the side, what's a new bag limit that we're happy with? Which fish do we use?
You have to use all 7. Okay, so any other question on non-commercial bag limits and reporting? Okay, yes.
Is it going to be raised?
We'll see what everybody says.
But I think by raising it at 10 to help the guys, but also at the same, the other hand, you need to have some way of reporting this or capturing this increased volume of fish that people are allowed to catch.
There's
Right, there's a right.
Another thing too is, people can do it, they can just take their own fish and not report it.
Even if they caught.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what they do?
They're doing that already.
Yeah, they're doing that already?
Yeah. So today it wouldn't matter if you change it or not. It just makes sense. That's if you do that, I guess. If you raise it to 10 or 15. Okay, so no other comments, questions, we'll move on to number 4. Okay, so a group of fishermen asked the chair of the department, the pilot, to make a decision on the purpose. Should they stay, should they go, or whatever. So the chair said, I will let you know what my decision is in due time. Okay, so he admitted that it took him a lot longer than he had expected to answer that question. That question was much more complicated than he had originally thought it was going to be. So eventually he made his decision in January of this year, and he announced it to a small group of fishermen. So that small group of fishermen that met with him got to hear this presentation firsthand a year ago. And some of you have heard it over the course of the year, but this is the first official opening of what the chair's plan for purpose are. And like it, dislike it, we want to hear what you want to say about it. But just as a point of reality, this is Chair Isla's plan. Chair Isla may not be here at the end of the month. or beginning of next month. So then, if there is a new chair, will there be a new plan? Who knows? I don't know. There may be a new plan. There may be no plan. It depends on who the next chair is, if the current chair stays or leaves. What the chair asked me to do is review the plan to the fishing community, get some feedback on what they think of the plan. Is it subject to change? Yes, it is subject to change. But he's cautioning that if this is his plan, but he's not the sole determinator. He doesn't make the final decisions. That rests with the Department Board of Land and Natural Resources. They can overrule it, and they have in the past. So he's saying that if there is enough public sentiment against his plan, if there are enough members of the board who make that decision or against the plan, it can be changed. But from his perspective, this is the best plan that he can think of and wants to put forward. Okay. So it can be changed, but this is his plan. We don't know how long the plan will be in plan. But this is what it is. Okay, so currently there are 12 restricted fishing areas, statewide, we call them purpose. So that the hash mark areas A through M are the current fishing areas. Okay, and the plan is to open 6 of them and keep 6 of them closed. And so he did a half-half. Half closed and open half of them. So why are 6 being closed? Remaining, why is he opening 6, closing 6? Okay, so first of all, the 6 that he's chosen to remain closed are circled in the red squares. Okay, so E is the Nihao Bertha, E is the Makapo Bertha, F is Penguin Banks, G is Kalaupapa, H is Pailolo, it's in the channel between Maui and Molokai. J is K is Kohala, on the east side of the Big Island. So those are the 6 that he's chosen to remain closed. Okay, so bigger question, why does the state continue to have berthas at all? Right? Okay, so it's a difference in management philosophy. The state believes that the area closure type process tool is a better ecosystem management tool than the federal catch limit approach. We feel that it provides an extra conservation benefit that goes beyond the federal catch limit. So we feel that it should not be removed just because there is a federal catch limit. It should be a jointly managed fishery, the state's plan and the federal plan. There's room for both, in his opinion. Okay? We should not, as a state, depend entirely on the federal ACL to determine how best to manage this issue. You may or may not agree with that, but that's what he says. That's what he says. Okay, so we go to each of the berthas. So bertha B, Nihao, it's the only area out of the 12 that since the inception of the bertha system in 1998, it has remained relatively intact. So in 2007, the department revised these areas. It changed it from 19 to 12. It removed some. It made most of them bigger. But the only one that stayed relatively the same size and location was bertha B, Nihao. Okay, so because it's the longest intact bertha, it provides the best information on long-term effects of area closures. So we're looking at this area to study those long-term closure effects. So we'll go a little bit into the research that we're conducting a little further in the presentation. But that's the reason why Nihao is chosen. Makapu, this area was substantially expanded from the 1998 version, but he feels that this area has good onaga and paka in it, and so he wants to continue to have this area closed. This area was particularly burdensome, let's say, to Oahu fishermen. They were very disappointed to hear that he was going to recommend to keep this. But that's on his mind now. Okay, so Penguin Banks, Bertha F. This stream will remain closed because, as you all know, the banks is the most productive area for bottomfish statewide. And in particular, the fingers are the most productive areas statewide as well. And so what he wants to do is continue to keep Bertha F that covers second and third fingers because they're very productive. He wants to continue to do research in these areas to get a better idea of why are these areas so productive. Kalaupapa. This area is going to remain closed because based on the studies that we've done so far, the scientists have indicated to us that this area has very good bottom habitat for bottom fish. And so what they want to do is they want to be able to study it in the future because they have not studied it thus far. We didn't have enough money to have him study all the areas that he wanted to study. Okay, so this was one area that they found good habitat in, but they didn't have enough money to do any research on, and we still don't have money to do research on. But the hope is that if there is funds available in the future, that we can initiate research in this profile because of its good habitat. The Kailolo Channel in between Molokai and Maui. This area was created in the 2007 revision. Because it's in the channel, it's very hard to fish most of the year. Only very experienced fishermen can regularly fish this area. Full-time commercial fishermen can fish this area. They were also very disappointed to hear that this is going to remain closed. He wanted to keep this area closed because he feels that there's a good habitat there, plus he feels that he wants to study the paka grounds in this area. So it's going to remain closed. And the last area is Kohala on the northeast side of the Big Island. This area also has been identified as an area with very good habitat. The problem is that it's far away from Oahu where the research vessel is based. And so there's a lot of cost involved in getting to it. That's why it hasn't been researched very much up to this point. But it's a very large area. It will take a lot of resources to properly research this area. But it has what they've identified as very good grounds, so they wanted to keep it closed as an area for potential research. The other consideration was that because this area is on the northeast side of the Big Island, it's very difficult to fish most of the time. And so because there's relatively low fishing pressure in the area, keeping it was going to have a minimum impact on the fishery. And so he's looking at the impact on the fishery as well as the habitat and the potential for good research to come out of an area like this. Okay, so we already talked about the non-commercial bag limit and the non-commercial reporting. Let me stop here and then ask the question about the berthas in your survey. So you go to your survey. On the back of the first page, we begin the questions on the berthas. Okay, so question number 8. First question is, should we open all the berthas? Okay, so if you feel that you would like to agree with this, strongly agree with this, check that box. What I will do is, if 99.9% of you say get rid of them all, that's what I'll report to the chair and to the board. Public says you should get rid of them all. That's what I'm committed to report what you tell me. Okay. The second question 9 is opposite. Keep them all closed. There are some people who will support this option. They may not be here tonight, but they may be. So if you are here, you can check this option. Okay, so this doesn't mean that you can check, you have to check 8, 9, and 10. You can choose one or the other. You can leave them blank if you want to check, disagree with this. Okay, and the third option is, as proposed, the 6 that are going to remain closed will remain closed, all the rest will be open. So you can support the proposal as it is. Now the fourth question asks, so if you don't like the ones that he's chosen to remain closed, the 6 that is going to remain closed, you can choose which ones you want to remain closed. Yeah. If it's not, then you would have taken question number 18. But if there are any that you would like to see remain closed, you can have the option of checking one of these. Okay. So any questions on what is the question asked? So let me ask.
Do you guys have data on the berthlets? How much fish are moving out, or are more fish moving in?
Okay, so Sana starts going to the research that we done. So we've collected 7 years of data so far. We're in the collection of the 8th year data. So 7 years of data, starting back in 2007. We did botcam studies that collected data. For those of you who don't know what botcam is, it's a camera that's remotely operated from a ship that goes down and looks in the bertha taking video. So that video recording is what they use to estimate what kind of fish they see, how many they are, how big they are. Right? So that's how he's collected this data. It's considered a non-extractive method, so you don't have to fish it. But it's a way to estimate abundance, numbers, species in an area without removing any of the fish. Okay, so that data that he's collected over 7 years, he has analyzed, and his findings basically says that he thinks that they were of benefit to the fishery. It was a good thing, according to him. So he's seeing bigger fish in the closed areas. He's looked at how long that area has been established, and he's looked at how long it takes for say, a papa or naga to grow. He has the feeling that that growth that he's seeing, because he is seeing bigger fish in the area, that bigger fish is bigger because it's in the bertha. So the 7 years that it's been in place, that translates to 7 years ago. So that's he doesn't know, but he's estimating that based on the rate of growth and how long the bertha has been closed, that growth will take 7 years. Yes.
Did you get the chance to open the movie?
Yes.
You're ready to that side.
So he says it's a good thing. may agree or disagree with that, that's what he said. Did I answer your question?
The other question is, you have data, somebody being a profile.
Well, you move it in and out.
Is it spilling out? Or are all the fish moving in?
Along with his study, part of it is looking at, he looked at this profile, he looked at the size of the fish in the profile, he looked at surrounding area, how big are the fish in that area surrounding the profile. And he's saying that the big fish in the profile, but as you go further and further away from the profile, the fish get smaller and smaller. Okay, so what he attributes that to is that the spillover. So the bigger fish are spilling outside of the bertha into the surrounding area, and as you go further and further away from the bertha, they get smaller and smaller. So that's what he's saying is the spillover from the bertha. Voodoo science.
Isn't the bertha better habitat though?
Is it better habitat?
That's why they say the bertha. Yeah. That's like the key, and it's not landmines.
It is, yeah. It's not necessarily based on better habitat. That's something that they're still trying to figure out. They think this is better habitat, but whether or not it actually is, that study hasn't been done yet. But just based on the results that he's seen, that's how he's interpreting the data that he's seen. Okay, so in addition to this spillover effect that he's seeing, what we're doing also is we're funding another study to do acoustic tagging of fish, bottomfish as they move in and out of the berths. Okay, so then we can see how many fish are moving, how long they take when they move, do they come back once they go out, that kind of stuff. So that study is currently being done yet. I haven't seen any preliminary results of that yet, but that's one of the studies that we're looking at. Is there movement in and out of the berth? How much is there? Okay, so did I answer your question on that? Okay. Well, let me ask Richard's question and I get to it.
Thank you. Maybe you could relay a message to the chair. Maybe to the closed areas, maybe you could issue a special permit to get the fishermen out there to do analysis and possibly catch some fish and get some information. Since the chair says we have no money, so when we get the fishermen involved, we get a special permit going to the closed areas, to sample the areas. I think something like the cost of fishing, some cooperative research among the local fishermen.
There currently is science center research involving commercial fishermen that doing exactly that.
Exactly, that's the problem, it's limited, yeah.
Yes.
What I'm trying to get to is the everyday person that can go there. Because what another organization is going through a controlled atmosphere. What I'm stating is having these areas open where commercial fishermen or non-commercial fishermen can get a permit, a special permit to fish the area. Rather than having another organization sampling the areas with more.
One of the things that we want to do in those areas that are planned to be open, we want to collect more specific data from the fishermen who will be fishing that area after it's open. So looking at maybe getting more detailed information from fishermen that fished in berths that will be open. There would not be a need for permit because the area is going to be open, but it may not be the best area to survey, but it is graph, and so hopefully get some information from fishermen who are fishing the areas that will be open. But
yeah, so the areas on the Makapu side is a closed area.
Yes.
So the guys who fish on the Yellowfin would have easy access, but at the same time, government working with the fishermen can get valuable data. So by applying a special permit for commercial guys to get out to that area where they don't have to go to hazardous waters, for the transporting into certain areas where to access bottom fishing areas, to navigate through the hazardous. But to the Makapu area, to maybe, for those who reside over there, do a special bottom fishing permit to sample the area, to see if you have a spillover effect, to see if the biomass is in there.
Let me get to
No, well, exactly what he's saying is, because the Makapu area was closed when my son was 2 years old, he's 18 now, he's not been able to fish close to Oahu. He has to travel far and risk his life and limb to go fishing. And that's why I wanted it, I think that you guys should at least, if not, open it maybe every 4 years or 2 years or something, but I think that you're not giving the new generation, there we go, an opportunity.
Opportunity. Plus the skill building.
Alton, I had a question, two questions. One was about the size determination. How fine of a measurement are they able to determine on a swimming fish with the research?
with the botcam.
Yeah.
They do a twin camera setup, so it's a stereo, and then so they have set distance from the camera focus length, and they already have pre-measured a ruler, and so they can tell that this fish this far away from the lens will be this big. So
How fine of a measurement is that, is my question?
Down to centimeters.
Down to centimeters?
So I think maybe even less than a centimeter. But they're saying it's a very accurate measurement.
So my other question had to do with enforcement. What is the plan if 6 remain closed? What is the enforcement plan?
Are we going to enforce
Yeah.
the purpose?
Yeah.
I don't know. I would guess that it would be enforced primarily the way it's being enforced now.
Which is none, basically.
Well, I don't want to say that, but they will enforce those areas as best they can. Yes, sir.
The science that we use to determine the ACL, does that take into account the state research?
No, we do not.
Not at all.
No.
Well,
let me qualify that. Okay, so what the Science Center did, or is doing now, is they're doing a comparative study. They're calling it the intercalibration study. So what they're doing is they're testing different methods of surveying in these areas and outside these areas. Okay, so there's 4 different methods that they're using. So they're using botcam as one of those. They're using acoustic video. They're using fisherman survey, and they're using remote operated vehicles. So basically what they're trying to do is figure out which is the best method to use to assess these very difficult to reach areas. And so preliminarily what they're saying is there's 2 that seem to be the best out of the 4. And one is fishermen, the fishing effort that they do, and the other is the botcam. Okay, so they see a potential benefit, or at least a potential way forward in terms of what kind of research methodology they could use to get better information on bottomfish in the purpose. The other 2 are very expensive, and so they're being ruled out in terms of how much money you spend versus what kind of information you get back. So the other 2 don't seem to make that cut. So they're going to be what they call operationalizing those 2 different methodologies as they move forward. So turn it from a study into an actual way that they're going to serve it. So they're still doing that study now. So that's where they are. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Randy, to answer your question a little bit more directly about the bertha and whether it's included in the stock assessment, the answer is that Alton provided is correct. It is not. However, this is for the stock assessment for the 2014-2015, which is the one that's very controversial now. Just today, we met with the scientists, and I can tell you that based on the discussion, they did take a note that said include some assumptions about bertha biomass in the assessment, so they're aware of it. Now, what's going to result, I cannot tell you. I just try to give you more information. Thank you, Alvin.
Okay, thank you. So, any other questions on the bertha?
The bot cam, what is the issue? Only the bottom? Is it up a little bit or?
When I asked Dr. Gracie that question, what is your field of view? He's saying that he surveys off the bottom. I don't know actually what depth off the bottom he's surveying. And I asked him, the fishermen are telling us, you cannot be too close to the bottom. You have to be more up in the water column to get a better picture of what's there. And his response to me was that he understands that, but when they initially did the surveys, they decided for whatever reason to survey that area off the bottom. And to change it now might bias the data that he's getting. So he doesn't want to change the methodology at this point. Okay, so good, bad, or otherwise, that's the methodology they chose, and that's what he's staying with, so that that data can be analyzed consistently throughout the time series. Now, if there's an opportunity to now use a different methodology, we would have to fund that separately, but he did hear that comment. I did talk to him about it. That's why he's chosen not to change the methodology, in spite of what the fishermen say. Any other questions?
Doesn't that skew the data?
Excuse me?
Doesn't that skew the data? Fishermen are telling you one thing, and you want to keep your methodology the same thing.
Right.
You're getting bad data at that time, you get bad data.
But it's consistently bad data.
Yeah.
Not to make light of the question, but yeah.
Without bad data?
That's what he's chosen to do. So that's what we did.
Is that the right way to do it?
There probably are better ways to do it, but that's the way that he's chosen. So that's the study he's done, and that's what we use. Okay, so there's still one more other question that we needed to discuss. So if you can, we'll move on from the purpose. Okay, if you have any more questions, you can see us after. So the last question of the survey asks about fishing effort. How do you determine fishing effort? So I'll let Reginald explain what that is.
Just for my benefit, I know some of you around here. For a show of hands, how many of you have a commercial fishing license? Just raise your hand. Okay. Of you people, how many of you are in the deep 7 bottomfish fishery? Just about all of you raise your hand. Okay. Just like what Ron was alluding to a little earlier, he and I attended top story session with Pacific Island Fisheries Science Center. These are the stock assessment people who use your commercial fish catch report. We have a data sharing agreement. And this is a very important lead potentially to your ACL, your fishery management. So your fish catch report don't go in a black hole, it's called fishery dependent data. Now what we learned is on that stock assessment, what they're really using right now is your total catch. Okay, that's the pounds of your deep 7 and your day fish. Now we have other things that we're collecting on that deep 7 report. Lines, hours, number loss, etc. Okay. The present ratio, catch pounds and day fish, to a certain extent there's some uncertainty in it. And if you want to get better data, when I ask the scientists, if if you want to really improve the catch data that we have today, what do you really need? And where they're headed to, they're not analyzing it right now, it's line hours. Okay, so what do we mean by line hours? Okay, so just think of your boat. Okay, some of you maybe have 2 stations, 3 stations, or 1 station. Maybe you start with 2 stations and you end up with one and the bite is good. Okay, so what they're looking at is, first of all, let's look at your hours. We want soak time, not your transit time when you left on a little day, you hit ping and bang, not the transit time, not when you're tying the line, drop your line, okay? That's the first pass. And if you've got 2 stations, think about your catch report, okay? That's 1 line of data. The first station, line goes down, it's 1 line. The next station, line goes down, timing. It's the second line. You bring it up, stop your time. Okay? It's 2 lines of data. Take your time measure. And then of course, whatever your catch is. This is important. You have it here, your total catch. Not only the deep set and all of your bycatch. Okay? And even when you think about it, when you go home, total catch means the catch, even the catch that you don't sell, give away, or for home consumption. Everything should go on your report. Okay, that's important. Okay. Now let's go back to this example. You made a first pass, a drop. You went back again to your spot, you made another drop. Maybe this time you only used 1 line, 1 workstation. Time the hours fish. That's the 3rd line in your catch report, total catch. I recognize this is a reporting burden to all of you. But if you really want better catch per unit of information, that's what the scientists are looking at. That's what they would really need ultimately. And that's what we're asking in this survey. Can you or can you not provide this kind of information? I mean, that's about as short and simple as I can tell it to you right now. Any questions on that?
Yeah, how fine of a time measurement do you want? Can we estimate or?
It would be an estimate.
Yeah.
As long as we take out all that travel time,
Right.
time you're fixing lines, as long as your lines are not in that water, you don't want to put that on the clock. I recognize this is a real hard, it's a very cumbersome reporting. You guys are busy out there.
Does the time that you're lining the water count double if you get 2 lines?
No.
I know on the report it says how many lines you use.
Yeah. Right.
So if I'm by myself, I drop 2 lines one time, it only counts as, you know I have 2 lines.
Yeah.
But the time in the water is combined time for the 2 lines.
Correct. Right. In other words, okay, maybe, actually the report is set up to capture every single drop per station. Okay, so in other words, if I did the example, if I tried to write the example that I'm explaining, that would take 3 lines, but you could probably write it in 1. Okay, but then you're going to lose some of the detailed catchment effort. All the Science Center wants to do is just ask if people could give it at such a detailed level that's possible. And what that would do is it would reduce the uncertainty in their analysis.
So the one thing I want to add, so the question in the survey is asking, are you willing to provide that detailed information?
Line out.
Because we know that it will increase the reporting burden. And so what the fishermen are willing to give the scientists and what the scientists want, there's a gap between the two. And what we're trying to do is figure out how big is that gap. Are we this close or are we this close? So that's what that question is asking. Are you willing to provide us that level of detail?
I will recognize the level of detail that we're asking. It's almost nothing short of putting an observer on the boat, which is not feasible, but that's basically what it comes down to. So the level of detail is a big reporting burden.
So would it make a difference of how many hooks you running?
Good question. I asked the scientists that, at this point, they're not analyzing the number of hooks. It would be best to have you here and tell you exactly why. I mean, I had interesting conversations with Uncle Roy and Ed Watamura, and there's different fishing styles, right? There's the monkey dogs and Mr. Fish Food. Even the science center at this point is not looking at the different styles. They're trying to dominate that within the model. So they're trying to keep it simple, but this level of detail, although it's a reporting burden, at the very least, that's what they're looking for, if they can get it. Any other questions?
One last thing, Walter Kihara from the fire office. He has something he wants to say.
Okay, thank you. You may recall I passed these brochures out earlier tonight. I just want to make sure that you understand that since we moved our office, all the address and phone number information on here is outdated. Okay, so if you think you might want to contact us, I have my business cards over here. Please take one. It has the current number and address. Okay, so yeah, so everything except the back panel on this thing is fine. Except the phone numbers here are different. I got thousands of each, so I'm gonna get rid of this. Okay, the other thing I have up here that I want to draw your attention is we have a compliance guide here, which is a kind of a detailed guide to the non-commercial permit and the reporting process. So if you're interested in finding more about that, this is a good document to pick up. I also have the application forms for the permit here. If you're interested in looking at it, or maybe you may want to give it to a friend of yours who might be interested. I have one of my permittees here. Thank you very much. So these are here. The current fee is $34. It used to be $41. Now $34. Commercial marine license is $50. This non-commercial federal permit is $34. And in the beginning of this program, when it started, you had to also register separately with the National Saltwater Angler Registry. Okay, so now you're exempt from that. So you don't have to do that either. Okay, so just this one will suffice. The other thing I wanted to point out was this is a sample of our federal logbook. Okay, you can come up here and take a look at it. One thing I might want to point out is that, you know, Reggie was talking about line hours as a measurement of effort, as a more precise measurement than just a day fished. This log sheet has number of lines and number of hours posted on it. Okay, so we are asking for that kind of information on the federal logbook. All right, so you can take a look at it and see what it looks like. You can think about what it might take to fill this in.
Okay. Question. For clarification, Walter, you get the non-commercial, you don't need to federal register, or you don't need to federal register period?
If you get the non-commercial bottomfish permit, you don't have to do the National Saltwater Angler Registry. We'll send your name in to headquarters, and they'll just add you in. Okay, so you're exempt from that. Okay.
So, in deep 7 fishing, you either gotta have a commercial or non-commercial or federal
CML. Yeah, so you're fishing in federal waters for deep 7, non-commercial. You need to get either a CML or you need our federal permit. And it applies to every person, every fisherman on the boat. Even the owner, that's the owner, the captain, and the crew. Okay? So it's an individual permit.
Okay, any other questions for Walter? Otherwise, what we'd like to do is, if you're filled out your survey form, we'll collect them here, and he has the little tickets. So if everybody who wants to turn it in now, we'll make you get a ticket, and then we're going to give away the 3 prizes here. Some people already have their tickets, and are waiting. So, and then we'll all be here for a while, so if you want to